Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Golan Levin. I'm a professor of art and director of the place you're in, which is the Frank-Ratchye Studio for Creative Inquiry. This is the research laboratory of the College of Fine Arts here at Carnegie Mellon University, dedicated to the support of atypical, antidisciplinary, and interinstitutional research and progress and programs at the intersection of art, science, technology, and culture. It's lovely to welcome you here. This evening, we are thrilled to partner with the Miller Institute of Contemporary Art here at Carnegie Mellon to bring Morehshin Allahyari, a wonderful artist, activist, educator, and curator and writer here to Carnegie Mellon to speak. It's the second time Moreshin has been here back to Carnegie Mellon. We're thrilled to welcome her back. The first time she was here was 2015, early 2015, when she was in residency with her collaborator Daniel Rourke on the 3D Additivist Manifesto, in my opinion, possibly the most important book written on 3D printing and its sort of cultural implications and exponents. It's a magnificent book, which I highly encourage you to check out and download if you're interested in maker culture and 3D printing and the Anthropocene. So I'm just going to briefly tell you a bit about Moreshin. She is an artist, activist, writer, and educator, born in Iran and moved to the United States in 2007. Her work deals with the political, social, and cultural contradictions we face every day. She thinks about technology as a philosophical toolset to reflect on objects and as a poetic means to document our personal and collective lives and struggles in the 21st century. Moreshin is the co-author, as I mentioned, of the 3D Additivism Cookbook with Daniel Rourke. She's been part of numerous exhibitions, festivals, and workshops around the world, including the Venice Biennale di Archittectura, the New Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Pompidou Center, Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal, Tate Modern, Queens Museum, Pori Museum, Powerhouse Museum, Dallas Museum of Art, and the Museum for Angewandte Kunst. She's the recipient of the Leading Global Thinkers of 2016 award by Foreign Policy magazine. Recently, she's been awarded major commissions by Rhizome, the New Museum, Whitney Museum of American Art, Liverpool Biennale, and FACT. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure, in collaboration with the Miller ICA, to welcome Morehshin Allahyari.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Thanks, Golan, for having me. To Elizabeth, it's an honor to be back here. Thanks to all of you for making it to this talk. 1 second. For my water. Okay, so in this talk, I want to specifically focus on 3 major long-term projects that I've been working on in the last 5 years. I will reflect on poetic and practical possibilities of technology, refiguration, digital colonialism, monstrosity, and myth-thinking as major concepts for these projects. How can we use technology as a tool for political resistance, for personal and collective storytelling, for defining space and opening up potential, a position for outside that asks difficult questions and suggests alternative methods? I usually like to start a lot of my lectures with this topic of art activism. And recently, this has been one of the ways that I have talked about it. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the concept of art activism is sort of a way of practicing and thinking about the art that goes beyond the art world, the problems of the art world, the walls of a gallery, and then thinking about how different concepts and topics can relate to different experiences, political, social experiences of the past, of our time, or in relationship to the future. This is a quote by Nina Simon from this documentary, which is, spoke to me a lot. And the documentary is What Happened, Miss Simon. I don't know if anyone has heard about it or watched it. If not, you should. It's a beautiful documentary. And in it, she talks about this thing that she calls artist duty, and how as a musician, for her, it's always been really important to use this platform that she has access to, her music, as ways to activate that very stage, to respond to political issues, well, in her case, about Black struggles and lives. And for me, growing up in Iran, this was something that I connected to in many ways, because I think politics is so embedded in your daily life and your choices and ways you should or shouldn't live your life, that me and I think a lot of my friends who are artists, make work that, again, inherently responds to different political, social issues. So I think sometimes it's actually about not having the privilege of making art that is not about these issues, because they're, again, so embedded into your life. So that's how I frame my work, my practice for the last 10 years. And now I'm going to move to this project that I want to briefly talk about. This was a project that Golan mentioned, the 3D Additivist Manifesto, the 3D Additivist Cookbook, where in 2015, my collaborator, Daniel Rourke, and I came here at CMU and sat here upstairs and worked on different components of the cookbook. But one of the first questions that we started asking when working on this project was this question: what does a radical use of digital technologies, digital fabrication look like? And what is radicality in this very time? One of the things that would happen constantly whenever we would talk about fabrication, 3D printing, 3D scanning, at a time, this is again 2014, 2015, to just put it in a context, was that people would ask us this question that, oh, have you heard about this project by Cody Wilson, The Liberator, which is like, again, if you don't know about it, it's a project that proposes that you can 3D print this gun that potentially works. And when this project came out, there was a lot of buzz around it. People were freaking out. There were so many articles about it. They took him to the court. And people were like, oh, wow, what's going to happen now? Anyone can basically 3D print a gun that can function, which is crazy, because if you really understand this technology of 3D printing, you know that it's harder to actually get this gun to work than to just, in America, just buy a gun from somewhere. So the fact that people responded to it, and the fact that this became a project that, a lot of people were like thinking about as like provocative and radical, was kind of, something that we wanted to work against. And that's why this question of radicality became important to us, because I think in so many ways, and I also think very much in the Western context, radicality has been so connected to violence in a way. And I think there are ways to remove that, to stay away from that, and then make work that is provocative, that is radical, but is not necessarily violent. And that's what we wanted to do with our project, which kind of like became, a movement under this umbrella of additivism. So additivism was a term we coined. It's a combination of the two words additive and activism. Additive technologies like 3D printers, or additive processes like weaving and knitting, and then versus subtractive processes, let's say like carving or laser cutter. And so we were interested in this idea of additive processes, additive technologies, and then bringing that together with activism. And by the time that we started to like work on a manifesto text and then release the manifesto text, which I'm not gonna have time to show the video today, but if you would like, you can look at it on my website. We had, by the time that manifesto came out, we had like sort of like build a collective, a community around us of people who wanted to, again, rethink the use of these digital technologies. And that became much more feasible and sort of like practical with this project, which is the 3D Additives Cookbook. So after the manifesto came out, with the manifesto, we also released a call where we asked designers, writers, artists, activists to respond to our call and rethink the potential of these technologies. Again, these technologies that were, especially at a time, were being used by a lot of, fab labs, a lot of architecture design projects, but a lot of banal, uninteresting projects were coming out of it. I mean, I did a residency at Pier 9, Madeline was there, and there were a lot of projects that people were doing there that, it was just like, why are you using these printers and like wasting all this material? And I don't understand what you're doing with this whole project, And this thing with technology, in which just because you have access to it, you shouldn't be using it. And I really believe in that. Like, you should like really ask why you're using a tool and what does that mean. So the 3D Additives Cookbook became that project for us, where we had submissions, and then we made selection from submissions, and then we commissioned some people because we had some fundings, from CMU to actually also another residency we did at Transmediale in Berlin, and we put together this book, which is printed now. It's available at the gallery. I just saw it, and it's so weird because I have not seen this book printed. It's basically a PDF online, and it's a 3D PDF, which is really geeky. You can open it in Adobe, and all these 3D models rotate, and you can change the colors, so play around with also that form, which was really fun for us, but it was a crazy process to actually get this older technology 3D PDF to work. So it was nice to see it also in print. And yeah, so check that out if you're interested in this project. And then around the same time that I was working on this stuff, I also was doing a lot of things around 3D printing and archiving, thinking about archiving as an art practice, thinking about 3D printing as a process that can document different aspects, different experiences, or archive different aspects of our lives. And this is when this video of ISIS destroying the artifacts came out. It was in 2016, February 2016, and maybe some of you remember it. It was a video that went viral, and it's basically documenting ISIS members destroying these artifacts at Mosul Museum in Iraq, and they're it's very visually present in a way that they are doing the destruction work and then explaining why they're doing it. So when this video came out, it was a huge shock for a lot of people, especially the way that it was presented. I mean, I think it was actually the first time really that a terrorist group was putting out a whole documentation of destroying something, which is kind of amazing and fucked up in so many ways. But the fact that they used YouTube, they first uploaded on YouTube. I mean, obviously YouTube brought it down immediately, but they used these very platforms that we use to promote this message, and then it went viral. So it was all over the place. And when I saw this video, I sort of wanted to do something that was a continuous of the research that I was doing, again, thinking about archiving and documenting, but also I wanted to do something with these artifacts that were destroyed. And I started to do a lot of research about the artifacts, trying to figure out, which one that were destroyed was original, which one was copies, try to figure out their names, which you would think is easy, but the last 30 years in Iraq, it's been over 30 years. It's been so much conflict. The museum has been understaffed, underfunded. So a lot of these things actually hadn't been documented as much, whether it's photography or documentation of the names. I would look at some document in Arabic or Farsi, and the name of an object would be something. And then I would look at a newer document, and the name of it would be something else. So I was emailing tons of historians and scholars who do research in this era, trying to gather this information. So now looking back at it, I always say it was this thing that felt like swimming in a pool, and then it turned into an ocean, because I never thought it's going to be this intense in terms of research and gathering of this material. So that took a while. And then the same issue, again, the lack of information was something that I had to figure out when it came down to reconstructing these artifacts, because there were not enough images available from the artifacts that were high quality. So again, that took a long time to find and put together. And after that, I was working on reconstructing these artifacts as accurately as possible. These are the first two that I 3D printed in resin material, King Uthal and Unknown King of Hatra. And because the research aspect of this project was really important to me, and the process of making the work, I wanted to sort of include that in the sculptures themselves. So inside of each of these artifacts, there are 12 of them that I worked on. I have embedded these memory cards and flash drives that contain all this research that I've done from PDF files, images of making the work, my email correspondence with historians and scholars, to STL OBJ files, which are standard 3D printable files, meaning that anyone who has access to these memory cards and drives, they can reprint these artifacts again. But also at this time, I started to think about these sculptures as time capsules, right? So how to keep this information for future civilizations. One of the questions that I get in a lot of my talks, people ask me if they have to like destroy the artifact to like have access to the memory card. So the answer is no, and the way that I've like worked around that is that, you know, there's kind of like a plug, the same material, resin, that you can, I mean, it's glued and sealed, so it won't be easy, but you can like pull that out and take the material out. I'm just gonna go through this real quick. This was up at New Museum like 2 months ago, and then now it's on a tour with also New Museum. But they've traveled more than me, so. And I also, in a way that I wanted this, again, the research to become part of the work, I also wanted to like make sure that research can be accessible to people at this moment. So we, with Rhizome and New Museum, we released a zip folder in 2016 that contains, again, all the research material and one of the STL OBJ files, which is of King Utha. And then I expanded this to sort of like this dead drop idea, so that these could be installed. I mean, there's only one of each of these sculptures, and I don't sell them, I only like show them. But then I wanted to sort of be able to like have like 3 of each of these heads printed so they can be in multiple spaces, and then they're like less fragile to me in some way. So these can be installed in different galleries, or, you know, like more of sort of like underground spaces for people to, again, connect it to a USB and have access to the technology. They're out in this, maybe you've seen it in the hallway. And so now we're going to the aftermath of material speculation. And around the same time that I was doing this work, there was also, again, it was not only a big hype around 3D printing, but also 3D scanners. 3D scanners as these tools that a lot of archaeologists, a lot of tech companies were using, and they were doing these kind of like reconstruction works, right? So, for example, in this case, like ISIS didn't only like destroy the artifacts at Mosul Museum, they destroyed a bunch of other historical sites, etc., in Syria and Iraq. So there were a lot of projects that were coming out of, especially like a lot of like tech companies, where they were like trying to do these kind of like reconstruction works, or they were traveling to safe parts of, you know, the global south or like Africa, etc., and they were like 3D scanning different historical sites. And when that became like really like popular, I mean, people would constantly like send me like projects. Hey, look, this project like from like Palmyra, it reminded me of your project. And after a while, I was like, wait a minute, this is like so weird that like all these companies are like now doing this like reconstruction work. And I wanted to like really understand why they're interested in this kind of work, like why they're doing this kind of like reconstruction work in these countries, and what's happening to the data that they were gathering. And this is when I coined this term, digital colonialism, which is, as you can see there, is kind of like a simple, I guess, description of it is a framework for critically examining the tendency for information technologies to be deployed in ways that reproduce colonial power relationships. And at the time, I was like really focusing on this concept of digital colonialism, again, in relationship to digital fabrication tools, in relationship to 3D printers and 3D scanners. And what was happening in the research that I've done, I mean, I could give you like a whole 1 hour talk only on digital colonialism, because the research is really deep. There's a lot of examples, a lot of material that I've like gathered. But to sort of give you a brief explanation of that, is that there all these, again, companies, like this is one of them, which is SciArc. I was focusing on this one, which is in Oakland. There's another one, which is Google Arts and Culture. You might know that one. And also like a bunch of other institutions that were doing this kind of work. And I was just going to their website or like emailing them and asking them what are they doing with this material that they're gathering. So on SciArc's website, for example, this is a screenshot of that, you can see images of these sites that they're 3D scanning, but then there's no 3D models, there's no data that they give access to. They even like in a conference, one of these people that work with these companies, they were like, oh, we have a 3D scan of Persepolis in Iran. I was like, can I have it? That would be amazing. I would really love to like have access to it. And they're like, no, we only give like private access to like specific institutions. So basically they sell a lot of this material. They only give private access to certain institutions with this like data that they gather. And also, to kind of maybe like compare it to colonialism in a way that we maybe like understand more. Like if you go to the British Museum, or if you go to Met, and if you choose to like critically think about these objects that are there, you can understand colonialism in that sense. Like there are objects that are there that a lot of them are looted, stolen, or they never had permission to bring it there. So we understand colonialism in that sense. Like this is a good example, which is with the Nefertiti, right? The Nefertiti is like one of the most known artifacts from Egypt. And in the last decades, there has been back and forth between the Egypt government and the German government. The Egyptian government's like, we want this back. You never got permission to like take it, and we want it back to Egypt. And then the German government is like, no, we're not giving it back to you. It's, we have it here, basically. So now it has gone to this extent with these new technologies and new tools that they have these like super accurate, beautiful replica of it, right? And then they're selling it online. You can see here for like 8,900 euro, and you can choose up to 10 of them. And yeah, so they're basically also like making money off like, again, using, and they have a 3D scan of this. I mean, there's a whole project called Other Nefertiti, where these artists, does anyone know about this project, Other Nefertiti? Yeah. So these artists who they live in Berlin, but they have kind of like roots, their background in Egypt. They did this project where they went to the new museum, which is again in Berlin, where the actual Nefertiti head is, and they did this guerrilla style work, which was like they 3D scanned the artifact that was there. I mean, there's a whole thing around it afterward. Some nerd came and like found a video where they document doing the 3D scan, and he was like, you didn't do this with this scanner that you're showing, because there's no way you could use this scanner to, scan something this high quality. So there are a lot of like things about somehow they got access to a file. Maybe someone at the museum gave it to them. Nobody knows. They never like said how they got the file. But in general, I think this is one of the really amazing examples of sort of like working against museums, because they had asked the museum to give them the 3D model, the 3D file, and the museum was like, no, we're not giving access to this file to you. And so they did this project where they went and then they released it publicly. Yeah, so there's that. So there's these like problems of ownership of data, and it's like closed access that these companies, these institutions have. And then there's also these like problems around, white savior. In this case, I'm gonna just let you watch this. So this is a video of unveiling of Palmyra in London, where Boris Johnson is like, showing it, and obviously this is like a remake of that video that artist Ryan Woodring made, which is when the launch happened, you see like nothing under it, right? But for many, obviously, again, this is an old problem, but I'm just trying to like show it to you with this kind of reconstruction work. For many centuries, this kind of work with politicians, etc., has been a way of like, these people putting themselves out as the heroes, as the saviors of these cultures, while actually, if you look back at the history of ISIS, you know that ISIS formation was because of the influence of U.S. military and because of the war in Iraq. So in this case, they remove themselves from these cycles where these cycles of violence where they've been involved. Not to mention that there were so many artifacts that were destroyed in Iraq and in Syria and in Afghanistan because of the U.S. invasion of these countries. But nobody really talks about that, right? And so these for me all became ways of talking again about technology, thinking about these projects that was getting a lot of sort of applause as these positive acts, but people were not really questioning what does this mean. Also, to end this part of my talk, which in relationship with digital colonialism, I would say that it's really important to question this notion of shared heritage, universal heritage. When you look at these websites, these kind of Western archaeologists' work, in this case, this lecture where he's calling the ISIS members barbarians and how they're saving the world. They are them, in this case, the UK saving these artifacts. This notion of shared heritage is very problematic. It's a concept that has been used for many centuries for justification of colonialism, right? So we have to ask what is shared heritage, what's universal heritage, and we have to question when in many cases it gets used again as a way to colonize other cultures. So ask me any question that you have later about this. Again, I could give a whole separate talk about these concepts in relationship to this. And after this project, when I became again really fascinated with these ideas around history and technology, I started to do a lot of research on these monstrous, dark goddess, female or queer figures from the Middle East. And one of the things that I had been thinking about for a long time before starting this project was this idea of, superheroes, right? I mean, y'all, again, see and know that whenever there's a superhero figure, 90% of the time, even maybe more, whether it's literature or cinema, it's a male figure. And so it was the same for me. Again, that's in the Western experience, but it was the same for me growing up in Iran. We read so many mythical histories because that's such an important part of our culture. And it's always these male figures. And so I wanted to go and find these genderless or female figures that their stories are misrepresented or basically hidden, untold. And then find them and bring their stories and tell new stories about them in relationship to different topics from colonialism, in relationship to patriarchy, global warming, etc., etc. And so I've been working on this project since 2016. It's very heavily research-based, and it has different components. But one of the things that I've been really interested in is this concept of Gen. I hate using the word genie, but I know when I say that, it's maybe connects a little bit to what Gen is, right? So genie, let's forget the Aladdin one that I guess a lot of people know about. But Gen are these figures that are very important in Islamic cultures. So they're talked about in the Quran, and there's angels that obey, devil disobey, humans we can obey or disobey, and then Gen also have the sort of will to obey or disobey. So there are these figures that are very hybrid. And also not only coming from the Quran, but also in our culture, in our daily life experiences, there are a lot of stories about Jinn. I remember my grandmother telling me stories about seeing Jinn, or people saying that they see more Jinn in hammam or bathhouses because they darker or more humid spaces. So it's very present in my life of growing up in Iran and again in other Islamic cultures. And so I wanted to use it as, these ways of reimagining the possibilities of the future through reimagining the past. And that's what I'm doing with this body of work. It has different components into it. And one is sort of building these sculptural elements or these shrine-like spaces. And also through that, thinking about this idea of refiguring, which is again a term that I started to develop in relationship to this body of work, thinking about refiguration as an activism and decolonizing practice, and ways that we can refigure different, again, figures and stories to tell new stories. This is the first gen that I worked on. Her name is Huma, and she's a gen that brings fever to human body. And I connect her story to bringing, again, like heat to human body and then expanding that to Earth and global warming, but again, as way to work against and resist these very, I think, like Western-centric stories of global warming and ways that we also can deal with it, right? I mean, when you think about someone like Elon Musk, right? His like solution is like to leave and go to Mars. And like imagine how many people can actually go to Mars with Elon Musk and his crew, and who is going to be left behind. And then remove it even from the class issues in let's say the US, and then like think about like other countries. I mean, there is like race involved here, there is class involved here, but there's also this idea of, again, like Western-centric solutions to the issues of global warming. And so through telling her story, again, this is a video that is 9 minutes, you can watch it on my website. I sort of retell her story, and she comes to create an equal sort of temperature and equal ways of like suffering, if we're gonna go suffer from global warming, basically in an imagined way, for all of us. So some kind of justice into, again, rethinking the sort of this apocalypse. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by this collective called Out of the Woods. And that's what they say. We need to engage with dystopian fiction that extrapolate from the white, able-bodied, colonial heteropatriarchy that structure our world. And I think that's something that I have been thinking a lot about, again, in relationship to global warming and ways to question it. So this is just a picture of the installation. And then alongside each of these figures, I also have been developing a bigger archive, because I've only created like a selection of these figures. But also there's really no archive that focuses on queer or genderless or female figures from the Middle East. And that has been something that has been really important for me, to gather text and visual material, etc., to be able to keep these stories alive and also accessible. So I built these reading rooms with my exhibitions where people can come and spend time with this work and read about stuff. I also put together these events, which I call refiguring, where I invite mostly like women based in, again, different countries in global South, from different backgrounds, different fields, to come and talk about different topics, which is in this like casual setup of people sitting around us. And going back to this concept of art activism, which I talked about at the beginning of my talk, I think for me these are ways that, again, you can think about having a work that can sit in a gallery space, but really how to expand out of that space. Like, so how can you organize? How can you do the work that is community building work? And then, again, activate these spaces in these ways. And that's something that has been really important for me, especially with this work, because it has so many layers to it. Okay, I'm gonna pass through this. This is Ayesha. She's a Gen, and she is very seductive. She's originally Moroccan, but again, her story is told in different parts of the world. And she's a Gen of rivers, and she is known as the opener. And when she possesses human, mostly men, she literally creates a crack on their body, like she opens up the male body into an outside space for incoming demons and other jinn. And the only way to not go insane when you're possessed by her is to participate with her, is to listen to her, is to basically obey. And I connect this work, I mean, the power of Ayesha, to talk about a personal love story and like talk about different components of toxic masculinity, and then sort of heartbreak, and then revenge, and then through that process, healing. And this is a pool, like a blood pool that I install her in. again, like thinking about each work as having its own shrine-like space. So you can sort of watch the video and like be present at this space. All right, 2 more figures, and then we do like a little performance thing together, and then that's it. So this is Jude Majors. Again, these are figures that I came across their story in originally in the Quran. And Jude Majors are known as the community of people or a group of individuals that they represent chaos. And so I actually came across this story a little bit after Trump became president. And when he became president, and then when the travel ban happened, I was in Berlin, actually working on the 3D Additives Cookbook. And then at a time I had my Iranian passport and a green card. And if you remember at the beginning of when he put the ban in, green card holders from those 6 countries were also included. So I couldn't come back to the US. And that was a really complicated, emotionally also super hard experience, because I've lived in the US for, 10 years at that point, and I have a whole life partner, whatever. And just like thinking about, and I also can't go back to Iran because I've done a lot of like political work, and thinking about what would happen, like how just, like that everything could just go basically to nothing. Everything that I had built could go back to nothing was super intense. I mean, I was privileged enough to have the green card and then eventually be able to come back, which is something that a lot of people actually don't have access to. And they're still dealing with what I experienced for like 2 weeks for now like 3 years. But when I came across this story, what happens with Jude Majors is that the people of this city asked this person Zoroastrian to build an iron wall around their city to keep Jude Majors out. And this sort of Islamic apocalyptic view is that when they come and when they break through this iron wall is when we're going to experience some kind of like ending. And in the tradition of this work that I'm doing with She Who Sees the Unknown series, one thing that I've been really interested in is this idea of embracing monstrosity. I mean, there's a long history of that with feminism. If you're familiar with people like Donna Haraway or Rosie Braidotti, or maybe you know this whole thing with like witches, for example, right? Witches historically being known as like old and ugly, but then how a lot of sort of feminist ways of refiguring them has turned them into these like powerful figures. And for me, this is the kind of work that I'm doing with these like monstrous gen figures, to turn around these power structures through embracing their monstrosity. And then this made so much sense because I think one way that whether it's Brexit or travel ban here, this kind of work gets justified is that these people are monstrous. They're the other. They're bad people. And if they come through, they are going to give us like trouble or they will do things that are, again, Trump keeps calling them like bad people, which is like such a like weird and like kind of childish way of putting this. But also like, I think these are ways that these kind of acts have been justified for so many years, including war in Iraq to go against the terrorists. So I tell a story with Jude Majors where I'm like turning around these like roles. So the people who asked Jude Majors to be banned and rejected, they became Jude Majors themselves, and sort of like through shifting these roles, I question again these notions of monstrosity and who's chaos for who. All right, and then there's a VR version of this, and then the last piece. This is a djinn. Her name is the Laughing Snake, and her story is that she is, this very like powerful figure. She's going to all these towns and cities and killing all these people, and no one can win a battle with her until someone comes and say that the only way to kill her is to hold a mirror in front of her. And then when they hold the mirror in front of her, she sees her reflection, she starts laughing for like days and nights until she dies from laughter. I mean, there you can see those like men like holding the mirror, right? And up there, this is from this old book called Kitab al-Bulhan, which is this Arabic book, which is around like 1100 years. And it's that when I came across this illustration, I loved it, because I'm like, wow, there's so much into this. So for me, thinking about this story, the way that I wanted to retell her story was to actually think about the laughter, think about that notion of death as something that is empowering. So through laughter and death, she's actually taking sort of ownership of her body, her reflection. And the death is something that can be empowering in that sense of these like storytelling. So I connect this to a story about street harassment, sexual desire, like growing up in Iran, which kind of connects to a lot of Me Too stuff. But again, I feel like a lot of Me Too kind of like stories have been very focused on like white women and their stories, and it's not like about other cultures or even like brown or black women's like experiences. And so for me, kind of talking about that was something that was really hard, and like not only because I wanted to tell this story, because there were a lot of things that I was very uncomfortable about talking about. So this was the piece that I made last year. And this is installed in a room with mirrors, and the audience can see themselves. And then there's a net art piece, which I'm going to show you, that tells these stories. Okay, so give me a second to switch, and I need your collaboration. So I'm thinking, most of you know about this idea of a hyperlink text or sort of like net art. And so this is a story that at the beginning is like linear, and as we go through, we have options to make decisions, basically. And since this is a big crowd, one, you have to remember which option the other person chose, so we don't like go in a loop. And then two, try to like tell me which one to choose one at a time. I mean, I know it's hard, but it will work. So, but also participate so that I can make the selections. Let me switch back to mirror. All right. I mean, it's, again, linear for now. She's the laughing snake, known as the one mirrored. There's no audio on. Is there audio on? I mean, this should have audio, but it's, yeah, it's on. No. Let me
She who saw all things in a broad on earth and beyond.
Okay. She's the laughing snake. Okay, now it broke. Technology.
She who saw all things in a
It doesn't like it when I skip it. Known as the one mirrored. She's the daughter to no warrior, wife to no nobleman, mother to no hero. She stands rootless yet rooted. The one displays the same elsewhere. She's the destroyer of all occupiers, the killer of the people of no sky, capturing those with wings who do not fly, putting out every fire in favor of her own flame. Flame. Her stories told at every edge of the world. A gen no one could elude. One time into the past and one time into the future, they prayed, "You have created this monster, now give her her equal." But no equal was found to fight her. All eyes on her, they held the mirror in front of her. When she saw her reflection, she burst into laughter. She laughed for days and nights until she died. What? Okay. I'm 12 at school, and in our theology class, our teacher tells us that if we keep on not covering our hair completely under the scarf. On the last judgment day, God will hang us from each strand of our hair. And I, one of those disobedient heads with all my hair out, I raise my hand to say, I don't want to pray to a God that is that cruel, and I will get suspended from school for 2 days. And somehow, for months and years since then, I keep imagining a scene where God is that caterpillar in Alice in Wonderland, and it's the last judgment day, and I'm hung from every single strand of my hair, and God says, explain yourself, and I laugh hysterically to say, I'm afraid I can't explain myself. Because I am not myself, sir. Alright, I'm gonna read this. آنقدر از هم فاصله داریم 1000 بار هم که بگویم نخواهی فهمید. از بین زمین و آسمان تو روی زمین بمان تا دور بگذار آسمان حد و مرز من باشد. Harry Cole, you said? Oh. All eyes on her, they held a mirror in front of her. When she saw her reflection within the world, she burst into laughter from the image, them holding a mirror. She laughed hysterically for days and nights until she died. And I will walk out and I will be on the bus and he will sit next to me and he will slowly start rubbing his elbow to my left breast and he will look out the window like nothing is happening while doing it. And I will take my safety pin out and I will calmly push it into his leg and I will push it in and I will push it in so much and so hard and so fiercely. And the more I push it in, the more blood will come out. And the more I push it in, the more his body falls apart. And the more I push it in, the more he will disappear. And the whole world will be watching, and he will be gone, and I will return to my body. And won't she turn around her image? All right, we do one more. Laugh at the image unless it's our image. I am 16, I'm 17, I'm 18, I'm 19, I'm 20, I'm 21, I'm 22. And please know that I'm just existing, walking around in the streets of Tehran in pants with a long manteau covering all my body and a scarf, taking the public taxi, standing in some line, taking the bus, sitting down somewhere, and young boys, middle-aged father, old grandpas, casually. Catcall me every single day to tell me what a nice piece of pussy I am, to tell me I want to fuck you and your mother, to tell me you look like a whore with that makeup, to tell me I can put my dick inside your ass if you want to stay a virgin, and young boys, middle-aged father, old grandpas, casually. Touch my lap and my breast and my ass, rub their penis on me in some crowded place, follow me for blocks at night, forcing me to get their number, and young boys, middle-aged fathers, old grandpas, ask for directions and show their penis in the car before driving off laughing, walk to me and whisper, if you waited here at the station, I will come back to pick you up after dropping my daughter. He points out to his daughter sitting in the car, and she's my age. And young boys, middle-aged father, old grandpas, make it to my nightmares, my subconscious, somewhere deep in my soul. And young boys, middle-aged fathers, old grandpas casually repeat into each other. Thank you.